Parents let my brother steal from me until I got my aunt involved. Back when I was still a kid, it was very hard for anything to be exclusively mine, and as my brother got older, he craved money for things above all else. He and I both got allowances, equal allowances, so that was sort of fair. I say sort of because he didn't have to do chores for his, while I did. But that's in the past now, because my brother is now having to do all those chores for nothing. My brother always wanted more money though, whether he spent it or not. He loved having new things, but sometimes he'd just save the money instead, which is odd because you'd think him the kind of kid who'd splurge his savings on the first thing he wants. My brother and I both got allowances of about $25 a month, and I was pretty thankful for it. I usually saved most of my money, but my brother always wanted more. One day as a teenager, I came home to find my room had been ransacked, and the only thing gone was my money. I'd hidden it to try and keep it from my brother. I thought I'd hidden it well, but he found it anyway. My mom was home when he did it too, and she acted like she didn't even notice. But there's no way she could not have heard him tearing my room up. I called her out on that during the intervention, and she just cried and made excuses about my brother being special, till other family members told her to shut up and own up to it. My room was on the first floor right near the living room. My door was completely in view of the couch. When I pointed this out back then, my mom just made the, "But he's special, he's not like you," excuse for my brother. I said I wanted the money back, and my mom just made more excuses. And my dad did too when he got home later. So yeah, excuses then and now. Back then, I did eventually get that money back because I refused to let it go. I heard my brothers screaming as they took the money out of his piggy bank and gave it back to me, and they had the most disappointed looks on their faces, like I just robbed my brother, even though he robbed me. But they couldn't tell me off because I wasn't in the wrong, and they knew it. I don't imagine many kids getting in the kind of situations where they are more right about something than their parents very often. A few months later, and the whole situation repeated. My brother ransacked my room again and stole the money I'd hidden again. That time, my parents didn't want to do anything about it, and basically said that they couldn't bear to see my brother so disappointed from taking his money. I reminded them that stolen money wasn't his money, and it was really crappy they were just sitting back and letting that happen. My dad yelled at me to go to my room for saying that, so the next day, I rode my bike to my aunt's house and told her everything. She came back home with me and asked my parents if they really let my brother steal from me and did nothing about it. My mom just started whining that my brother has special needs, and she didn't want to make him cry again, and my dad backed her up. My aunt just gave them both that narrow-eyed look and reminded them they have two sons, and my feelings mattered too, and what they were doing was very wrong, and it meant that my brother would never respect boundaries and would think he can always get away with stealing when he gets older. My aunt asked me openly how much my brother took. I stated the number, which at the time was everything I had, save for the few bucks in my wallet. My aunt gave my parents an expectant glare. My parents tried making a few more excuses, but my aunt had a counter for each one. Finally, my parents went into my brother's room, and a moment later, my brother was screaming. My parents came back with all of the money my brother took, and practically threw it at me for making my brother cry. My aunt then told them off for acting that way when I'd done nothing wrong, and they picked up all the money they'd thrown at me and gave a pretty forced apology. My aunt said that she'd been severely disappointed in them if they let this situation repeat. My aunt said that she'd be severely disappointed in them if they let this situation repeat, and before she left, my aunt offered for me to hide my money at her house in a lockbox she had. I took her up on that and started keeping my savings over there. My brother ended up ransacking my room 2 more times looking for money, but I was keeping every cent I had at my aunt's house. My parents actually asked me where I'd hidden it, and I refused to tell. Then I asked why they wanted to know so badly anyway, and my dad instantly got defensive about it. My mom calmed him down, and they didn't ask again. Since he couldn't find my money in my room, my brother figured I must have hidden it somewhere else. So he started tearing the house apart one room after another. And who was made to clean up the mess? Why, yours truly, of course. My parents started to blame me for the whole situation, but when I asked how I was at fault for not letting my brother steal from me, their only counter was that my brother had special needs. I swear, they used that line with me thousands of times. That was something else I heavily berated my parents for in the family intervention. The final straw came when my brother ran ransacked our parents' bedroom. My parents had a small suitcase safe that they kept some cash in, and my brother locked himself in the room, then took the whole safe and started bashing it around on stuff to try and get it open because he couldn't find the keys. By the time my parents were able to get the door open by breaking it open, my brother had destroyed the room, and he never got that safe open. He just sat on the floor clutching it and crying about the money inside it. My dad was so angry that he turned red. They actually started yelling at my brother and grounded him. A very rare sight for me to see back then indeed. Then my parents forced my brother to help clean up the mess. After that, my brother never ransacked mine or my parents' room looking for money again. But he'd still go rooting around every time he got an idea where my savings might be. So I started acting like I was giving hints by repeatedly going to certain places while he was watching. He ransacked the backyard shed, dug a bunch of holes in the yard and under the back porch, and even ransacked the attic. My parents really hit their breaking point with the attic and grounded my brother again. They never figured out I led him on either. My parents did eventually figure out I was keeping my money at my aunt's house, and they didn't argue with my reasoning for doing it. But either my brother overheard or one of them spilled the beans to him, because the next time we visited my aunt, my brother tried to hunt for the money, but my aunt yelled at him to stop, and my brother would just sit on the floor and cry. This happened a few times, and my aunt bluntly stated she'd press charges for any damages if my brother ransacked anything, and also kept a digital camera on hand to record anything if need be. My parents heavily scolded my brother to stop looking for my money. It wasn't his, and he can't have it. Cue more screaming and crying that he wants it like a 3-year-old, even though he was 7 at the time. Then my brother said he didn't want to go to Auntie's house anymore, so my parents visited less. My aunt visited us a lot more than we visited her anyway. I was pretty much able to keep my money away from my brother till after I moved out. He's never managed to steal cash from me again. His classmates at school were another story. He was caught looking through the backpacks of other kids many times, and he was forced to return stolen stuff and then sent home, where he'd cry to mom and dad, who then tried to have words with the school, who berated them on letting my brother think what he was doing was okay. They had to teach my brother that it's not okay to go through other people's stuff, and I actually heard him say, "But I wanted what they had," a few times. This excuse got used again when my brother stole an envelope with birthday money from a cousin during their birthday party. He tried to stuff it in his shirt and walk out with it later, but the cousin noticed it was missing, and I suspected my brother right away and pointed everyone to him. He ended up crying and thrashing when my dad found the envelope hidden in his shirt. We left that party early. I think you did the right thing by keeping your money hidden with your aunt in the end, as it is obvious that your family clearly favors your brother for some reason, and they were never going to stop him from stealing from you. It's really unfair the way your parents treat you compared to how they treat your brother, but I hope that now, after everything that has occurred, they can be a bit more transparent with how they treat both of you. I'm glad you had your aunt to help you out with the situation. She seems like a great woman. I hope things have gotten better for you now, and your brother is growing up and becoming less entitled. My parents decided to cancel my 14th birthday party to accommodate my spoiled younger brother, reinstated when I told everyone at school. I am now 20 years old. This happened when I was 14. I have a brother that's about 6 years younger than me. He was extra coddled by my parents for having been diagnosed with high-functioning autism when he was 4. But other than that, he seems very normal, just unbelievably spoiled. And he used that to get his way a lot. And by a lot, I mean nearly all the time. Anything I had, he also had to have. So that meant we had doubles of almost everything that wasn't shared items. And anything he had that I didn't, he'd rub in my face any way he could. When I was 11, I begged my parents for a 3DS for my 12th birthday. I got one, but then was told to lend it to my brother whenever he wanted it, or else I'd have it taken away, which was a lot. When my aunt found out after seeing my parents forcibly take my 3DS out of my hands to give to my brother on one of her visits, she let loose on them for such blatant favoritism. They returned my 3DS immediately, then blamed me for the situation after my aunt left, but they didn't make me give it to my brother again. Instead, my parents went out a few days later and bought another 3DS as a surprise gift for my brother. On several of mine and other people's birthdays, my brother made a huge fuss because the party wasn't all about him, even going so far as to outright state that he was upset because he wasn't getting any gifts or getting to blow out the candles on the cake. My parents learned the hard way that they couldn't enable my brother the way they'd have liked at those parties, and were actually kicked out of a few for trying. And because of that, other kids at his school stopped inviting him to birthday parties altogether. For me, my birthdays were some of the only days I had that I got to have about me, because otherwise my parents forced my life to revolve around my little brother. And the year prior to when this story took place, my parents ended up paying more attention to him the entire time of my 13th birthday. They even asked if I'd let my brother blow out my candles for me because he was upset and pouting. I refused that because I wanted to blow out my own candles. They called me a spoiled brat at first, till my aunt intervened and chastised them on their favoritism yet again, and stated how much she had noticed how my brother gets nearly everything between the two of us just because he's autistic. My parents got no support from anyone else there other than my brother, who was still crying because he wasn't getting to blow out my candles. And because he didn't get his way, he tried to outright spit on my cake out of spite. But my awesome aunt thankfully blocked him before he got the chance, then scolded him till he ran to my mom in tears. My parents took a lot of heat from the other adults there, and then promised to never ask me to let my brother blow out my candles again. But they pretty much just went through the motions for the rest of the party. My aunt pretty much took over coordinating everything from that point. The following year, a couple of weeks before my birthday, my parents sat me down and told me they were still going to get me some gifts and a small cake, but my birthday party was effectively canceled to avoid my brother having another meltdown. I told them I couldn't believe they were doing this to me, and they just seemed to shrug it off without a care. So at school over the next week, I told my friends, my teachers, and even my school counselor. All of them were appalled by my parents' lack of consideration or empathy. The vice principal even found out and consoled me. All of this got back to my parents through social media. My parents ended up grounding and gaslighting me for telling so many people. But that didn't stop me from still telling everyone at school that I was grounded for just being upset my birthday was canceled for no good reason. I guess that made it a lot worse, because several of my parents' own friends, along with parents to other kids in my school, called them up or sent them Facebook messages basically saying, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And suddenly, I was ungrounded. I didn't get an apology either. My dad just walked into my room with his arms crossed, told me my grounding was over early, and then walked out. That was it. I thought my party was still canceled because nobody said anything about it, and my brother found it hilarious and rubbed it in my face that I wasn't going to get to celebrate. But by the end of the 2 weeks, my parents held a surprise party for me at my favorite restaurant, and then started claiming that was their intent all along. I knew it wasn't. From what I'd seen, everyone was incredibly unhappy with them for what they did, and it showed with any interactions family members had with my parents. So they ended up doing the surprise party to try and save what little of their reputations they had left, but I'm pretty sure they had to pay through the nose that day to just accommodate me. I got dinner with all my friends at my favorite restaurant that had a small arcade, and even got the PS4 game system I'd been praying for at the time. I could tell it was all pretty much planned and bought last minute, because my dad had a look about him that my aunt comically described as looking like a moth had flown out of his wallet. My brother, of course, made a huge fuss that I got that surprise party, but with so many of my friends and their parents there, my mom and dad finally put their feet down on my brother to stop his tantrum when he wanted to push my cake off the table. My brother ended up getting a timeout for the first time since he was a toddler, and my mom had to stay with him to make sure he didn't do anything crazy. He did try several times to run the cake or stack of presents. Who knows what he would have done were it not for the fact at least one adult was always on guard. Even my dad stood guard to keep him away. My mom ended up having to remove my brother and herself from the party entirely, and took my little bro to a McDonald's nearby so he could have fun in the play area. And I heard later, she spent at least an hour trying to get him to come out of the play place tube structure, and he only did so because he had to use the bathroom, and then tried to run right back in again. My parents never tried to cancel my birthday again, while still I lived with them, though they never again tried as hard or spent as much. For the remaining 4 years I was under their roof, my birthday parties consisted of a local pizza parlor, a cake without even my name written on it, and never again anything as expensive as a new gaming system. I don't mean to sound spoiled, but I was a bit disappointed I never received a cake with my name on it again. My aunt called my parents out on that each year, and each year they claimed they forgot to get the cake decorated. I'm pretty sure that the reason my name was never written on another cake was because my brother always refused to eat pieces of cake that had writing of someone else's name on it at any party, and they couldn't put his name on any of my cakes or it would have looked very bad for them. But the fact I still got a day that was just about me at all and not my brother was still fantastic in my book, especially because just about everything else revolved around him. During each of my remaining birthday parties while still living at home, my brother made a fuss, and my mom took him somewhere else to calm him down. I was still required to share my PS4 with my brother, but it was still mine, and I took it with me when I moved out at 18. Little bro did not like that, and had a huge fit till my brothers went out and bought another PS4 for him. When I moved out, they finally had to deal with how they'd raised my brother so spoiled, because I wasn't there to help them with him anymore. On his recent 14th birthday, he went mental on our parents for not getting him a PS5. He is now currently grounded for I don't know how long after causing hundreds or maybe even thousands in collateral damage during his rampage. He picked up a chair and just started destroying anything that was in front of him with it, and my parents just looked mentally checked out when I saw them last. My aunt has also told me they confided in her that they wish they could send my brother to military or boarding school in the future because they can't handle the monster they created anymore, but there's no way they can afford that. I'd be lying if I said I didn't find it ironically funny. I can understand why you feel the way you do about your brother, but I think it's important to remember that he is your blood. Sure, he may have committed some very horrible acts in the past, but it doesn't mean that he has to continue doing so. He can change, and it sounds like he needs help, whether he knows it or not. Your parents brought him up in a way that he was always going to turn out spoiled, as they never said no to him. It seems like they've finally come to their senses, and punishing him for making mistakes so he can learn between right and wrong. Maybe you could try talking to him. Ask him what's going on with him. If nothing else, just try listening to him and being there for him. It might be hard at first because of how angry you are at him right now, but I think if you tried giving him a chance and opening up to him a little bit, then maybe things could start looking up for both of you. Deadbeat brother crashed my Crown Victoria. Gets a night in jail he won't forget. I have an older brother called Dave that has always been a jerk to me. There's only a 1-year gap between us, but he liked to beat me up when we were kids, and he always acted like anything that was mine was also his. He was also somewhat the golden child, which made me miserable. So no surprise I moved out at 18. My uncle is a now retired police officer, and he took me in after I left home. He even hooked me up with a decommissioned Crown Vic. I absolutely love that car. I don't know why, but Dave hated the fact I had that car. He drove 3 beater cars into the ground, while my Crown Vic kept chugging along. Well, after his 3rd beater finally died when he drove it into a pole, he asked to borrow my car. I had a bad feeling and said I wasn't going to do that. He called me entitled and said he needed a car to get to work. I told him to take the bus because I know how he drives, and my Crown Vic was off limits. My parents called me after that and told me to just lend him my car. I said I won't, no matter what they say. I rely on the car and need it as well since it's my personal transportation. Dave wasn't the only one in the world with a job he needed to get to. My uncle congratulated me for standing up to them and gave me a high five. A few days later when I got off work, the car wasn't where I parked it. I called my brother's cell, but he didn't pick up. Then I called my parents and asked them if he took my car. They denied it, so I said I was going to call the cops, and then they admitted he borrowed it because he needed it. I told them he better bring it back right now or I'll have police looking for him. They called me a jerk and then phoned Dave to bring my car back. He showed back up in the parking lot in my car 20 minutes later. I demanded to know how he stole my car, and he held up a set of police Crown Vic keys he'd bought online. I told him if he ever stole my car again, I'd have him arrested. Then he had the audacity to ask for a ride home. I told him he made me wait in the December cold after stealing my car so he could walk. He called me a jackass before I drove away. After that, my uncle installed a tracking device in the car. When Christmas Day came, I was celebrating with family like every year. The roads were cold and icy, so I had to be very careful while driving. Yeah, Dave borrowed my car again during the Christmas party. Apparently, he decided he was going to go pick up a friend and figured I wouldn't notice. But I did when I looked out the front window and saw my car was missing. I pulled up the tracking app and saw he was a few miles away, then called his cell to yell at him. Everyone in the party saw this and asked what was going on. I said Dave stole my car again, and my uncle confirmed it wasn't the first time. Dave told me over the phone to screw off and he'd be back soon. I said he better not have been drinking, but he just hung up on me. Well, while I was watching the tracker app, the dots stopped and didn't move for a while. Soon, we got a panic call from Dave asking for help. He'd crashed the car because he couldn't handle the icy roads, and he wasn't used to a rear-wheel drive vehicle. So we piled in my parents' minivan and followed the tracker. We found Dave by the road, and my Crown Vic nose deep in a snow-filled ditch. My uncle was furious, as it was formerly a car of his department, and I was mad as hell at Dave for stealing my car again. My parents wanted me to let it go, but I said enough was enough and was gonna call police. Dave begged me not to because he really had been drinking drinking before he set off and would get a DUI. I said he was gonna pay me back for my damn car then, or I'd sue him. Well, as luck would have it, police were already aware of the accident and were driving in to check on the scene. Someone else had called them, I guess. My parents tried to say that I was the one driving the car, and they were just there to help me. I said that wasn't true, and my uncle backed me up. In fact, one of the cops that was there recognized my uncle, and they had a chat. Then they went to Dave and asked to see his license, which I then found out was suspended after he'd crashed his previous car. Then they breath tested him. He wound up with cuffs slapped in his wrists, while my mother was crying and begging the police not to take him away. The officer just said that she and my dad could get arrested too for lying to police. That shut my parents up, and we got back in the minivan. The Christmas party was ended early, and my parents drove me and my uncle home since he rode with me. They didn't say much to either of us the whole drive, and just sped away as soon as we were out of their van. They nearly slipped off the road themselves doing that. My brother was let out of jail the next day. He looked so scared that he was practically crying. The cops there had roughed him up a bit while talking about prison and the stuff they'd seen go on there. Dave had actually pissed himself during that, and they let him take a shower. That's when my uncle started cracking up and revealed to us that his friends in the department never filed the DUI and just the charge for the suspended license, which was about a $600 fine. My uncle said he just wanted to teach Dave a lesson, and this would be the one and only time he'd ever get his help. Dave then apologized to me and said he'd pay to have my Crown Vic fixed and would never touch it again. When it got pulled out of the ditch, the front end damage was actually minor. It needs a new front bumper, a headlight, and a grille. The damage was just superficial, thankfully. My parents have pretty much glossed over the whole incident and act like it didn't happen. Dave gave me the extra Crown Vic keys he'd bought online and said this has taught him a lesson he won't soon forget. It all kind of worked out in the end. Your car didn't take too much damage, and your brother wasn't charged with nothing too serious, while still learning the lesson he needed from all of this. He can't think it is okay to just steal your car after you refuse to give it to him numerous times. This just shows how entitled he feels from the way your parents have brought him up as the favorite child. You made the right decision to leave as soon as you could, and I'm really glad you have an awesome uncle who was willing and able to help you out. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Check out the other videos on your screen right now. Otherwise, you're definitely the jerk.